Railway locomotives have been built out of many strange things, from old stationary pumps to bits of tractor. When you think of these engines, you usually imagine something scruffy looking cobbled together out of odds and ends for use in a factory or on a logging line. But there was one company that not only made some pretty high quality locomotives, but made them out of lorry parts. Established in Glasgow in 1875, Alley and McLellan Limited initially produced parts for steamships, eventually managing to expand their business into building full-sized ships from the ground up. In 1906, the company produced a 5-ton steam wagon which proved to be not only a reliable machine, but popular too. So much so that in 1915, the company opened a new factory in Shrewsbury dedicated solely to producing road vehicles. This became a separate company of its own, the Sentinel Wagon Works, wagon being spelt with 2 G's as a means to not only differentiate their steam wagons from competitors, but also as a way of suggesting that theirs were superior too. In 1923, the company produced their Super Sentinel, which was a significant improvement over their original design. Part of what made the Sentinels so popular was their boiler. The firebox was essentially a metal drum with crossing water tubes running through it, set at an angle of 1 in 6, while the outer walls of the firebox were surrounded by water. A superheater was fitted coiled around the firing chute. Since a firebox door was next to impossible to fit given the design of the boiler, wood, coal or whatever fuel was burned had to be dropped in from a hole in the top of the boiler. Though this arrangement made firing a bit awkward, the boilers were capable of raising steam very quickly. Naturally, with a fast steaming boiler and a talent for making reliable machines, it wasn't long before Sentinel started building their own railway locomotives. The dates are a little fuzzy as to when they built their first locomotive, with most sources suggesting it was 1923, but clearly there was just as much demand for Sentinel-built rail vehicles as for road vehicles, as in 1925, Sentinel Industrial Locomotives Limited was established to handle their construction and distribution. The first notable locomotive built by Sentinel was Coalbrookdale Ironworks No. 5. This initially was built as a saddle tank in 1865, but was rebuilt by Sentinel 60 years later in 1925. Rather than a conventional 040 layout, the engine was fitted with a vertical lorry boiler and a pair of vertically mounted cylinders pointing downwards, which drove the wheels via a set of gears and chains. This plucky little engine proved to be more economical than the previous saddle tank, and it's this layout that Sentinel adopted for their other locomotives. Though the designs differed depending on how big the overall locomotive was, most Sentinel engines followed the same overall layout. The boiler would be positioned at one end of the frames, cylinders on the opposite end, and a water tank set in the middle between them. While unconventional, this layout did have its perks. Having the cylinders drive the wheels via chain eliminated hammer blow while in motion, meaning the locomotive could run on lighter rails without issue. It also allowed for the locomotive to have a much shorter wheelbase while effectively eliminating the shimmying lateral movement that would usually come from the motion of horizontal cylinders. As well as being able to negotiate tighter bends, the cylinder layout also made the engines exceptionally quiet. The boilers were essentially bigger versions of the ones Sentinel installed in their lorries and could be serviced in a similar manner. After removing the ash pan and draining the boiler, the inner drum that made up the firebox could be dropped out to make thorough cleaning and washouts much easier. This meant that specialist equipment wasn't needed to lift the boiler from the locomotive, as the engine could be parked over a pit and let the drum drop down, also saving the need to disconnect pipes from the main boiler during servicing. The Sentinel road boilers were also designed to handle dirty and untreated water with little issue due to how frequently the lorries would have to refill. And given how similar the locomotive boilers were to the road ones, it's fair to assume that railways and industrial lines didn't have to worry too much about forking out for water filtration equipment. On top of that, the compact boilers took less time to get up to steam and left much more space for a bigger water tank, meaning the Sentinels could go much longer between refills than their standard, horizontally boilered counterparts. The compact size also meant in some situations that the engine could be operated with just one person doing both the driving and the firing. Not only were they simpler to maintain, but cheaper to run too, using significantly less coal than other standard engines of a similar size. As a result of all this, the Sentinels became a favoured choice as not only shunting engines, but for working on tramways and as the motive power for many rail cars. The Great Western Railway and the London Midland Scotland both tried Sentinel locomotives, but the London North Eastern Railway seemed to have the most interest in them, ordering 56 shunting engines between 1925 and 1933, as well as 2 custom tram engines and many different rail cars. The shunters had their cylinders positioned in the middle of the locomotive for better balance, and had gearing installed allowing for higher top speeds when running light and more pulling power at slower speeds when in lower gear. They burned an average of 15 pounds of coal per mile and had a top speed of 21 miles an hour. Outside of the Big Four, the Sentinels were very popular on industrial railways and in smaller private shunting yards. They even made a name for themselves abroad, with shunters and rail cars being used as far as New Zealand, Tasmania, Palestine, Brazil, Paraguay and Egypt, just to name a few, with a shunter still actively working in Brazil as recently as 2014, though it was retired and preserved that year. Their economy and practicality, however, came at the cost of power. While capable of handling a dozen wagons on their own, the Sentinels struggled with heavier loads. The 2 engines built for use on the Wisbech and Upwell tramway greatly struggled during harvest seasons and were relegated to shunters as a result. The Sentinels exceeded at pulling light trains on light rails and little more, but this was a niche they were perfectly content to fill. The final Sentinel steam locomotive was built in 1958, the company having begun producing petrol and diesel lorries and locomotives by the end of the 1930s. Like many industrial steam locomotives, a lot of Sentinels seem to have had the luck of dodging the cutter's torch and found themselves in preservation, with over 30 examples on display at various railways across the UK, including some used by the LMS, LNER and the single Great Western unit, and many more around the world. While not the biggest or most powerful engines ever built, Sentinel steam shunters did prove to be reliable little runabouts all over the world. Their rail cars maybe not so much, but considering these were locomotives essentially made out of lorry parts, I reckon they did pretty well to make a name for themselves. Just goes to show that it's not what you're made of that makes you special, but how you apply it. Subscribe for more.